It's been almost 2 years since it happened, and honestly, it still comes to mind sometimes when things are quiet. I was around 26, working a pretty standard office job and trying to save money, which is why I ended up subletting a room from someone I found online. He seemed perfectly normal, a bit chatty maybe, and overly interested in when I'd be at work and what my commute was like, but nothing that felt alarming at the time. It was just a temporary living situation, a way to cut costs, and I didn't expect it to stick with me this long. The chipped mug was the first thing. I'd been using it for weeks, every morning with my coffee, and it was off. Not broken, not cracked, just different. The floral pattern, a little blue forget-me-not design, had always wrapped around the whole mug. Suddenly, it stopped about 1 inch from the handle, a blank strip of white ceramic. I stared at it, turning it in my hands, convinced I was losing it. Maybe I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was always like that. It was a cheap mug, I figured, probably a manufacturing flaw. I mentioned it to Mark, my landlord. The next time I saw him, he was in the hallway, fiddling with the thermostat, which he did constantly. "Oh yeah," he said, without even looking at the mug. "They sometimes come out like that. A batch issue, I think." He didn't notice before. He just knew about a flaw I'd only just spotted, which was weird, but he was always puttering around, inventorying stuff, checking the smoke detectors. He was a bit of a handyman, always offering to fix things. A few days later, I came home and the curtains in my bedroom were different. Not new exactly. They were the same heavy blackout curtains I'd had since I moved in, but they'd been adjusted. Shortened, I think, by about 1 inch. Enough that a sliver of evening light peeked through the bottom. I distinctly remember measuring them when I'd first hung them, making sure they scraped the floor. I figured maybe the washing machine had shrunk them, even though I hadn't washed them yet. It felt like a stretch, but better than thinking what? That Mark had been in my room altering my curtains? That was ridiculous. He had a key, sure, but he seemed so harmless. A little eccentric, maybe. I locked the door a little more carefully that night. The little things kept adding up. It wasn't just the mug and the curtains anymore. I started really looking. Dusting, mostly, and that's when I noticed the books on the shelf were rearranged. Not a big rearrangement, just different. I'd organized them alphabetically by author when I first unpacked, and now a few were out of order. It wasn't random, though. They were grouped by color, almost dark spines together, light ones next to each other. It was aesthetic, and completely not my style. I asked Mark about it, trying to sound casual. "Hey, did you happen to be in my room recently? Just wondering about the books." He blinked at me, a slow, deliberate blink. "Oh no, haven't been in there for weeks. Just making sure everything's tidy, you know. Curb appeal." He gestured vaguely towards the front of the house. "Curb appeal for my bookshelf." That's when I started checking things. Every morning, a quick inventory. The position of the lamp, the angle of the rug, the number of pens on my desk. It was exhausting. And then I realized the photos on my nightstand had been subtly rotated, just a few degrees, but enough to notice. They weren't facing me anymore. They were facing the door. I started taking the long way to work, walking an extra 2 blocks just to avoid passing Mark if he was outside. I convinced myself he was lonely, that he just wanted to be helpful, that he was a little fixated on making the place look nice. Maybe he was a frustrated interior designer. It was a harmless explanation, and I desperately wanted to believe it. Then I found the key. Not a key to my room, but one of those little magnetic keys for the laundry room. I hadn't been to the laundry room in over 1 week, but it was lying on top of my dresser, clean and slightly warmer than the other objects on the surface. The laundry key, it just sat there, gleaming. I picked it up, icy cold now, and turned it over and over. It wasn't about the laundry, it was a message. It was proof of something I'd been trying so hard not to acknowledge. I needed to see if anything else was moved. I started with the kitchen. Everything seemed normal. Plates, knives, the fruit bowl. Then I opened the cupboard under the sink. And that's when I smelled it. Not bad. Exactly. Just different. Like cinnamon. But I don't use cinnamon. I don't even own cinnamon. And there, tucked behind the cleaning supplies, was a small woven basket. It was filled with pine cones. They were painted gold. It was like something out of a craft fair. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Who puts gold-painted pine cones under the sink? I was starting to think maybe I was losing it. Overworked, stressed, imagining things. Maybe Mark wasn't doing this. Maybe it was me. Sleepwalking, rearranging things and then forgetting that had to be it. A weird subconscious nesting thing. I went to close the cupboard, and that's when I heard it. A soft click from inside the wall. Not a mechanical click, but like wood settling or something shifting against wood. It was momentary, easily missed, but I froze. I reached out and pressed my ear against the plaster. Silence, and then, again, a softer click, followed by a barely audible scraping sound like fingernails on drywall. It wasn't above the pipes, it was level with the floor, directly behind the pine cones. I yanked the cupboard door shut and backed away, knocking over a bottle of dish soap. I didn't even bother to pick it up. I just ran out the door, down the hallway, and into the relative safety of the street. I didn't stop running until I was 3 blocks away, standing in front of a diner, heart hammering. I needed coffee, strong coffee, and I needed to call someone. The coffee didn't help. Not really. It just made my hands shake faster. I called the police, of course, non-emergency line. At first, I explained about the noises, the pine cones, and everything. The officer on the phone was polite, but you could hear the skepticism. He sent someone over anyway, a young guy barely out of the academy, I figured. He went through the apartment, methodical, shining a flashlight into corners. He checked the walls and tapped on the plaster. He even looked under the sink. He asked me about the pine cones and I told him about the cinnamon smell. He sniffed around and wrinkled his nose. "Don't smell anything," he said. He found nothing, absolutely nothing. He asked about the landlord, Mr. Abernathy. I told him he seemed odd, quiet, always watching. The officer said landlords were like that, protective of their property. He filled out a report and said they'd increase patrols in the area. It felt like a waste of time. I tried to convince myself it was a waste of time, that I was letting stress get to me. So I went back to the apartment. I wanted to prove to myself it was nothing. I went straight to the cupboard under the sink. I took out the cleaning supplies and then I started pulling out the pipes, checking the connections, looking for, I don't know, a hole, a secret passage, anything. I found a small access panel. It was screwed into the back of the cupboard, almost invisible. I unscrewed it. It revealed a shallow cavity, and inside, neatly coiled, was a length of Ethernet cable connected to nothing, just hanging there. It had to be for the security system, right? Mr. Abernathy was just upgrading things, modernizing. I told myself that, even as my stomach twisted. It explained the clicking, the scraping, wiring being run. He hadn't told me about any upgrades. He hadn't told me anything, but it was harmless, just an upgrade. I screwed the panel back on. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at the windows, at the hallway, even at the pine cones. They seemed to gleam in the dim light, and I realized with a cold certainty that I wasn't safe in that apartment. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building felt deliberate. Every gust of wind rattling the windows felt deliberate. I kept imagining Mr. Abernathy somewhere in the shadows, watching. I ended up just driving. I drove for hours until the sky started to lighten. I ended up at a 24-hour diner outside the city. I kept the apartment key in my hand the whole time like a talisman. I told myself it was just paranoia. I told myself the officer was right. I was stressed, but I couldn't shake the image of that Ethernet cable. It felt wrong, like it wasn't about security, like it was for something, not just part of something. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just a tinkerer. Maybe he was an eccentric old man with a hobby. And maybe all the pine cones, the smell, the noises, maybe he was just trying to make the place feel more welcoming. It was a weird, unsettling way to do it, but still, it felt less terrifying if I could tell myself he was just lonely. I moved out 1 week later. I broke the lease, ate the deposit, and didn't care. I found a place in a newer building, one with security cameras in the hallways and a doorman. It helped a little, but I still check. Everywhere I go, I check. I check every hotel room, Every rental, even campsites. I checked the back of cupboards, the access panels, the places where a camera could be hidden. I run my hands along the walls, looking for inconsistencies. It's ridiculous, I know it probably is. But it's just a habit now. It's a stupid, exhausting habit. It's been almost 5 years, and sometimes, late at night, I still wonder how long he was watching before I ever noticed. I'm finally writing this down because it's been stuck in my head for almost 2 years now, and honestly, just typing it out feels necessary. I was in my late 20s at the time, working a pretty standard office job and trying to get into a consistent gym routine. A few months back, I was on a road trip between cities when I got a flat tire on a really empty stretch of highway. A man stopped to help, which was incredibly kind, and at the time I didn't think twice about accepting his assistance or when he offered his number for future emergencies. The tire was completely shredded. Honestly, I have no idea what I hit. Just gone. I was 20 minutes from Asheville, which felt like the middle of nowhere at that point. I'd pulled over as far as I could, hazard lights blinking. I was already mentally calculating how long it would take for roadside assistance to arrive when I saw headlights. He was driving a pickup, older model, dark green. He stopped right behind me, got out, and without a word, started assessing the damage. He was big, not necessarily muscular, just large-framed, and he moved with a kind of quiet efficiency. He had these incredibly pale eyes, almost gray, and didn't really look at me, more through me if that makes sense. He changed the tire in 10 minutes, which was impressive. He didn't say much, just grunted a few times and asked if I knew how to use the spare. I said yeah, my dad had taught me. He nodded, wiped his hands on a rag, and that's when he offered his number, said, just in case, these roads can be rough. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper, thanking him profusely. He seemed eager to help, almost too eager. Now that I think about it, he kept glancing at the woods lining the highway like he was checking something. I figured he was just a local, maybe worried about deer or something. Perfectly reasonable. I got back on the road and honestly forgot about the whole thing until a few weeks later. I was looking for a plumber, and I swear his number was scribbled on a notepad on my kitchen counter. I didn't remember writing it there. I figured I'd just subconsciously moved the scrap of paper, maybe stuck it with bills or something. It was weird, but not scary. Not yet. I threw the plumber's notepad away, decided it was just a weird coincidence. But then it started happening again. Small things. I'd mentioned something to a coworker, a restaurant I wanted to try, a movie I'd seen, and then 1 week later I'd see a green pickup truck, the same model as the one on the highway, parked a block away. Always just there. Never close enough to feel directly targeted, but close enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't the same truck every time. Not exactly. Similar though. Same color. Same general shape. I started noticing them everywhere, and I started taking different routes to work. Cutting across town instead of using the highway. It felt ridiculous, paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed, observed. One Saturday, I decided to go hiking, a trail I'd been wanting to try, about 1 hour outside of Asheville. I got there early, wanting to avoid the crowds. I parked the car, started down the trail, and about 1 mile in, I saw him. Not him exactly, but a man who looked remarkably like the guy from the highway. Same build, same pale eyes. He was just standing there, leaning against a tree, looking in my direction. He didn't say anything. He didn't even acknowledge me. I sped up, practically ran the rest of the trail. I told myself it was just a coincidence. A lot of people look alike. Asheville is a tourist town. Maybe he was a hiker too, but when I got back to the parking lot, his truck was there, parked across from mine. Empty. I waited for 20 minutes, my heart hammering, before I dared to get in my car. I drove straight home, skipped the grocery store, just went inside and locked the door. I thought maybe he was a lonely guy, just trying to make a connection, a misguided attempt at friendship. Which was awful, but less awful than anything else I could come up with. I even started looking for green pickups on purpose, trying to get a plate number, anything. Just to prove to myself I was being stupid. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, Every rustle of leaves outside the window had me jumping. I kept replaying the image of that truck in the parking lot. It wasn't just being there, it was the emptiness of it, like whoever was inside had just vanished. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed to think. I needed to get out of the house. I decided to drive back to the trail, just to look around. Maybe there was a ranger station nearby, someone who could explain why a truck would be sitting unattended in the middle of nowhere. The parking lot was empty. Good. But as I started walking the trail, I noticed something. A small wooden carving tucked into the base of the tree where I'd seen the man leaning. It was a bird, crudely made but familiar. I picked it up, turned it over. Scratched into the wood, almost invisible, were my initials. My breath hitched. I didn't carve this. I haven't carved anything since I was a kid. I started to walk faster, scanning the trees, the undergrowth. Then I saw it, partially hidden behind a bush, one of my hiking boots. The laces were undone, like someone had taken it off in a hurry. My stomach twisted. I hadn't noticed it missing this morning, but I always double knot those laces. Then I heard the snapping of a twig, close. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, the shadows. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, maybe, but I didn't believe it. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, nearly dropping them. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. A flash of green. It was a truck, but too far away to make out details. I floored it, driving faster than I ever had before, convinced he was just trying to scare me. He wanted me to know he could find me. He wanted me to be afraid. It was a sick game, but at least now I understood the rules. I tried to go back to normal, really. I did. I went to work. I went grocery shopping. I even took a different route home every day, just in case. I started carrying pepper spray, which felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for a bear attack in a parking lot. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I caught someone looking at me, I'd scan for a green pickup. For a while, I thought I saw it everywhere. Just glimpses, though, a flash of color, a similar shape, probably just my imagination. Then things started happening at the house. Small things, a window unlocked that I was sure I'd closed, a kitchen chair slightly out of place. I kept telling myself it was me being forgetful, stressed, but it was escalating. I found one of my hiking socks, the blue one with the little red flowers, tangled in the rose bushes under my bedroom window. I hadn't worn those socks in weeks. I decided to be proactive. I installed security cameras covering all the entrances. I told myself it would make me feel better, even if it didn't catch anything. The first night, I spent hours watching the monitor, jumping at shadows, nothing. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, and there it was. A figure moving through the trees at the edge of my property, not close enough to make out a face, but the way they moved, slow, deliberate. And they were carrying something long and thin. I zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as I could. It looked like a piece of wood, shaped like a bird. I felt sick. It wasn't about the truck. It wasn't about scaring me. He, whoever he was leaving me gifts. Twisted, disturbing gifts. It was a courtship, some kind of awful possessive gesture, and that was worse than anything I'd imagined. I called the police, showed them the footage. They took a report, said they'd patrol the area more frequently. They didn't seem to understand. They asked if I had a boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend. I told them no. I just wanted it to stop. The police stopped patrolling after 2 weeks. I think they figured I was just paranoid, or maybe they didn't think it was worth their time. I stopped mentioning the little things. The doormat turned sideways. A single playing card, the Queen of Spades, was on the kitchen table. It felt pathetic to keep reporting it, like I was begging for attention, for someone to validate how truly wrong everything felt. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to the bed. I barely slept at all. I kept replaying the camera footage, focusing on the way the figure moved. It wasn't a young man, I realized. The gait was older. Someone who had spent a long time outdoors, used to carrying things. A logger, maybe? There were a lot of logging trucks on the highway. Maybe it was just some guy who liked to whittle and thought he was being friendly, in a creepy backwoods sort of way. Maybe he just wanted to show off his carvings. I started taking a different route to work, a longer one, avoiding the stretch of road where I'd had the flat tire. It felt ridiculous, like I was letting him win, changing my life because of some eccentric craftsman. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always there, just beyond my line of sight. I don't pull over to help anyone now, not even if they look genuinely stranded. A flat tire, a stalled engine, I just keep driving. It feels awful, I know it does, but I tell myself it's not my problem. It's just I can't. Not anymore. It's been nearly 5 years, and I still grip the steering wheel a little too tightly every time I pass that stretch of highway. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet the memory is always right there, cool and sharp against my skin. I'm sharing this because it's been on my mind a lot lately. Even years after it happened, I was in my early 20s then, driving a beat-up car between cities for work, mostly just long stretches of highway and roadside diners. It seems silly now, but I remember being grateful when someone stopped to help with a flat tire. It felt like a small kindness in a pretty monotonous routine. At the time, accepting help didn't feel like anything more than practical, but it stuck with me. The highway was mostly flat. Endless cornfields blurred past. I'd just finished a lukewarm coffee at some diner with chipped Formica tables, and was trying to catch up on voicemails. That's when I felt it. The wobble, the thump thump thump, flat tire. Of course. I pulled over onto the shoulder, side, and started digging in the trunk. That's when the truck stopped. Big, lifted, chrome everywhere. It looked like something out of a magazine. The guy who got out was intense. Not unfriendly exactly, but just present. Broad shoulders, didn't smile much, but he offered to help without me even asking. He said he carried a heavy-duty jack and air compressor. I hesitated only for a second. I was already running late. He worked quickly and efficiently. He didn't say much. He kept glancing toward the tree line, though just quick, assessing looks. I thought maybe he was a hunter or something. He asked where I was headed, and I told him. He asked what I did, normal stuff. Then he asked for my number. He said he sometimes saw folks stranded out there and liked to check if they made it okay. It seemed odd, but I gave it to him. I felt rude not to. He handed me a business card, Dale's Mobile Repair, it said. There was no shop address, just a cell phone number. He finished up, wiped his hands on a rag, and gave me a curt nod. As he was getting back in his truck, he paused, turned around, and just looked at me. A long look. Not creepy exactly, more measuring. I waved, started packing up my tools, and he drove off. I checked my phone a few minutes later, just to make sure I'd entered the number right. He'd already texted. Just making sure you're doing all right. I replied, all good, thanks again, and figured that was that. A nice guy, a little quirky, but harmless. It wasn't until later, much later, that I started to wonder why he needed my number to begin with. I drove another hour, maybe a little more, and my phone buzzed again, Dale. Just passing through Oakhaven. Thought I'd let you know there's a state trooper with a flat a few miles back. Might want to avoid that area. Oakhaven, that didn't make sense. I hadn't even come close to Oakhaven. My destination was almost directly east, and Oakhaven was north and a bit west. I checked my GPS, still on track, still nowhere near Oakhaven. I texted back, thanks for the heads up, but I'm way off course from Oakhaven, he replied almost instantly. Just letting everyone know roads can be tricky, easy to get turned around. It felt off, like he was testing something. I started to feel a little prickle on the back of my neck. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but just saw the usual empty highway. I decided to take the next exit just to put some distance between myself and whatever that was. I found a little diner, not much better than the last one, but quieter. I figured I'd grab a coffee and reassess my route. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a truck, a lifted chrome truck. Not his truck, not exactly, but the same model, same lift, same vibe. It was parked a few spaces down, and the driver was inside. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Lots of people like trucks, right? I got my coffee and sat in a booth by the window, trying to look casual while subtly watching the truck. The driver came out, stretched and looked right at me. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked. Then he got back in and drove off in the direction I was going. I finished my coffee quickly, paid, and got back on the highway. But I took a different exit than the one I'd planned. A longer route, but I didn't want to risk running into either of them again. I figured maybe Dale was just overly helpful, a little eccentric, maybe a volunteer with some sort of highway watch group or something. But the timing and the other truck, it didn't add up. I kept checking my mirror, not wanting to see Chrome. The longer route added 1 hour, but I told myself it was worth the peace of mind. I started to think I'd overreacted. Maybe it was just a coincidence. 2 similar trucks in a rural area. It wasn't impossible, and Dale probably just had a weird hobby, warning people about traffic. A little overzealous, but not malicious. Then my phone buzzed. It was Dale. He wrote, "Saw that trooper again, still on 17. They're bringing a wrecker now, but it might cause a backup. 17? I hadn't been on 17 in over 1 hour, not since I took that detour. And how did he know about the wrecker? It felt focused, like he was deliberately trying to steer me. I ignored it. Just let it go to voicemail. I thought I was almost to my destination, a small town called Havenwood. Just another 30 minutes. That's when I saw the roadblock. It wasn't a police roadblock. It wasn't official. Just 2 pickup trucks parked diagonally across the highway, blocking both lanes, both lifted, both chrome, and men were standing near them, not in uniforms, just watching. One of them, the one closest to my lane, was built like a refrigerator. He had his back to me, but I knew, somehow it was him, or someone like him. I slammed on the brakes, tires squealing. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. This wasn't some highway watch group. It was something else, something deliberate. I threw the truck into reverse, adrenaline spiking. I had to turn around, get back to the last exit. But before I could fully react, another truck pulled up behind me, boxing me in. I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was Dale. He wasn't smiling. He just looked. He slowly rolled down his window. "Having trouble?" he asked, his voice flat, without inflection. "Having trouble?" Dale asked, and the sound of his voice felt wrong, like a recording played slightly too slow. I didn't answer. I just stared straight ahead, trying to think. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I tried the gear shift, nothing. He'd blocked me in perfectly. It wasn't just blocking me in, though. It was precise. He'd angled his truck so I couldn't even swing wide enough to get onto the shoulder. I checked my side mirror, hoping for an opening, but the other truck, the one with the huge guy, hadn't moved an inch. They were just waiting. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking, no signal, of course. This whole stretch of highway was a dead zone, but it hadn't been before. It hadn't been when I was talking to my wife this morning. I remembered crystal clear, complaining about the detour, about how long it was taking, and now this. Maybe this was some kind of local thing, some weird territorial dispute. Maybe these guys were upset about outsiders. It sounded ridiculous even as I thought it, but it was the only thing I could latch onto. Something explainable, something that didn't involve whatever Dale was. I tried the gear shift again, harder this time, forcing it into reverse. Nothing. It was like the truck was locked in place. I looked up, and Dale was still watching me. Still that flat, empty expression. He hadn't said another word. He didn't need to. I understood, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't about a roadblock. This wasn't about territory. This wasn't even about the wrecker, or the trooper, or any of the things he'd mentioned. It was about me. He'd wanted me here. He'd planned for me to be here, and now I was trapped. They let me go after what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 30 minutes. Dale just backed up his truck. The other one followed suit. No words, no explanation, just gone. I put the truck in drive and didn't stop until I hit the next exit, a little diner about 20 miles up the road. I sat there for a long time, nursing a coffee, trying to make sense of it. I kept replaying the conversation with Dale, looking for something I'd missed, some trigger, some sign. It had to be something I said, right? I'd been venting about the load, about the delays, about how much I hated running this route. Maybe he was with a competitor. Maybe they thought I was badmouthing someone. It was stupid, I knew. But it was better than the alternative, better than believing it was personal. I called the company and reported it as a potential issue with aggressive drivers. They said they'd flag it, but honestly, I didn't expect anything to come of it. It was just a couple of guys on a highway. After that, I started being careful, really careful. I stopped offering information, any information. No more chatting with dispatch about my route, no more friendly waves to other truckers. And I definitely stopped accepting help, ever. It's just not worth it. I avoid that stretch of highway now, even if it adds hours to the run. I take the long way around, even if it cuts into my pay. It's a habit now, ingrained. Before I give anyone my contact information, even for legitimate reasons, I pause. I always pause. It's a small thing, a hesitation, but it's everything. I've lost a few loads over it, lost some good connections, but it feels necessary. It feels like a price worth paying. It's been almost 5 years now, and sometimes when the radio's quiet, I still see Dale's face in the rearview mirror.